Nico, let's get straight to the hot topic for today. In many ways, you are Mr. Transition.
I want to make sure that I build technology so that ultimately this job is just more streamlined. What I was doing 10 years ago when I was moving my book is the same exact way it is now. So I think there's a lot of upside to be able to improve this process. So my one wish right now is, why is there not an end-to-end platform that actually acts as the source of truth for financial advisors whenever they move firm to firm or custodian to custodian? That's what we need. I'm tired of Excel.
And I think you and I know of a platform that might just do that, Nico.
I think we built something a little bit. Maybe it took some time and it's only going to get smarter and better, right?
You've done so many transitions, and it's interesting that you've been in the trenches, you've done it yourself. Early on, was there like a specific transition where you're like, whoa, this is way too complex?
They all have their own challenges. It's not the transition to complex, it's a process. And I think the process changes quite a bit. That's a monster within itself. You know, whenever I looked at the transition project in a whole, and whenever me and you can actually sit down and then talk about what worked or what didn't work during the previous transition, you're drinking from a fire hose, and you're constantly having to, mold to that.
What does it feel like for an advisor that's on a move? Can't be easy, right? Because you feel like you want to be in control, but often you're not in control of everything.
Probably the most stressful time of their lives. Your salary and your income is at risk, as well as your livelihood and your reputation. So it's kind of like this massive undertaking that comes in, but then you're also learning. You're learning a new firm, new operation, new platform. It is exhaustive. The attrition risk for people who are doing this move alone is almost in the 50% over the first 18 months.
In your experience, what's that biggest fear for them? What is the main worry? What keeps them up at night?
Will my clients come with me? That's probably the biggest question mark.
I think it's time to now take the industry by storm in some ways.
I think that's the goal that we were realistically trying to achieve as a firm here on your side, is continuing to minimize that number, save hours, and make a central platform as the source of truth for everything else going forward. If we solve it, I do think there's something that can really change the way that business is being done in this space previously.
Hello, my friend. How are you?
Doing good, Vineet. Thanks for taking the time today. How are you, buddy?
Very good, very good. I'm very excited for this discussion today. I know you and I have spoken so much over the last few weeks and months, but this one's different. We've done close to 18 episodes on Advisor Ally as well. But I think this one is a special one. So thank you for your time as well, Nico.
Absolutely. To your point, it's been a pleasure getting to know you over the last couple of months too. Excited to see what we're building here. I do think we're going to do something that can change a couple of things in the space right now. I got my large cold brew. We're ready to have a nice long conversation here and make sure the world knows exactly what we're doing over here.
Exactly. Let's do this. I think I feel like like I said, we've been heads down building, and we've had so many in-depth conversations, but we've never sat down like this, right? To just take a step back and So this is a great opportunity. But maybe without wasting more time, Nico, let's get straight to the hot topic for today. For us, in many ways, you are Mr. Transition. But so how did that happen? How did you get pulled into this, man?
It's funny. I'd say the transition business kind of chose me by accident, to be dead honest with you. It's interesting. Starting off my career at Schwab, owning a book, working with a business partner at that point, then transitioning some clients. Then once TD got bought out by Schwab, I then transitioned some of my clients to an independent RIA where I owned my own practice, and eventually sold that to another superseding advisor too. But it taught me the process and the complexities related to it. It was every challenge is unique, and I had to kind of roll up my sleeves and do a lot of this myself. So it really did teach me the entire process from A to Z. And then one day, I got a call from New Edge Advisors and Eric Feldman, who was a colleague of mine over at my Schwab days, and they needed some support for an upcoming advisor transition who was going to be a non-protocol advisor. And, I had my experience on this, and the rest is history after that. Really just kind of fell into my lap, to be honest with you, Vineet. And it's something that I always wanted to say, hey, we want to do this, but I want to make sure that I build technology so that ultimately this job is just more streamlined. That was the biggest thing that I saw from day one, to be honest with you, because what I was doing 10 years ago when I was moving my book is the same exact way it is now. So I think there's a lot of upside to be able to improve this process.
Yeah, for sure. And looks like we have Mr. Feldman to thank a little bit for this as well. But, you've done so many transitions, and it's interesting that you've been in the trenches, you've done it yourself, your own books, so you know what it involves. But early on, was there like a specific transition where you're like, whoa, this is way too complex?
All of them is actually extremely unique the way that I see this. It's because if you kind of think about it, they all have their own challenges, but they all are their own firm, and each of the CS or their investment products or any of their banking options or what broker dealer assets they have, when you kind of think about it, yes, there's a repeatable process, but truly like every firm is completely different in this entire stance. And that's what was really complex here. It's like you can build a very good repeatable process for firm A, but then whenever you go to firm B, you got to change a thing here or there. And then you got to continuously evolve it to meet their specific needs and their specific procedures at that point. So I think it's like, it's not the transition is complex, it's the process. And I think the process, me saying how much it changes quite a bit, that's a monster within itself. And I think that that's just something that, whenever I looked at the transition project in a whole, and whenever me and you can actually sit down and then talk about some of the what worked or what didn't work during the previous transition, you're drinking from a fire hose and you're constantly having to mold to that. So that's just kind of interesting in the way that I've seen it.
Right. And like it is what you're saying is, and I understand it so much more deeply now. I think obviously there are many moving parts to transition, but the permutations and combinations depending on the end firm, the end custodian, the type of assets you're moving, it's insane. I mean, the nuances involved.
And like I said, every firm has their own different types of not only process, but their vehicles, their investment procedures. Yes, you get a normal RIA to RIA moves. It's pretty black and white. But whenever you're doing a true breakaway advisor and they have proprietary products with their old broker dealer or with their old custodian or with a Merrill Lynch or Morgan Stanley, you're going to unwind a lot of that stuff. And you actually have to get a hold of the clients and have them sell this in order for the transfers to come in. The process is very unique. It truly, it wasn't one transition. It was the actual going from step to step that made this rather intriguing.
Right. And along the way, did you ever feel like, hey, if we talk so much about technology, AI, everything changing today, right? Was there ever a wish that, hey, if this one thing were to change, from how transitions worked back then to now, would there be something at all in your mind?
It's funny, Vineet. Whenever we were talking about this, I was always saying, I think a lot of problems in this space is we're focused on a digital account opening tool, not a transition tool. There's a big difference in just you coming to me to open up an account, but me coming to you for moving a firm, opening up an account with that. Like the process gets a little bit different. And then you always say, what's my wish? I always just say, what changed? It's like I said, 10 years ago, there's been basically zero innovation in the transition experience besides the custodians focusing on their onboarding experience. It still, to this day, doesn't capture the end-to-end workflow of intaking information, reconciling it, populating the appropriate documents at the custodian and the firm side, and then improving that process from A to Z. So my one wish right now is, why is there not an end-to-end platform that actually acts as the source of truth for financial advisors whenever they move firm to firm or custodian to custodian? That's what we need. I'm tired of Excel. Let's get a platform to actually do this the right way.
And I think you and I know of a platform that might just do that. Nico.
I think we built something a little bit. Maybe it took some time, and it's only going to get smarter and better, right? So
absolutely.
Interested to kind of hear about that.
Absolutely. But for a lot of people, obviously everyone talks about how complex transitions are, but you've lived them for so many years, right? Can you like break it down a little bit? Maybe, what happens behind the scenes, right?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because everyone always thinks that, it's day one, the transition starts. It's not. It's kind of like the prep work behind the scenes, and it always starts because we are a third party specialist, so we can have conversations with them regarding their practice to
Mhm.
understand their intricacies, what they do today, what they're planning on doing tomorrow, and the type of data that they can bring. That sort of dictates the entire flow for the prep work prior to day one. If the advisors can bring their data, then we sit there, we intake it from the multiple sources, we massage the data for multiple days and ensure that it fits our specific format. Then we work on prep and documents as soon as possible, and then live date, that's whenever we send it out. But if they cannot bring their data, it comes into a lot of training, what to expect, write in their scripts, and sometimes even getting their offices ready. We've done that in the past too, so as crazy as it sounds. Prefer not to do that, but here we are, always going the extra mile for our clients, right? So it's interesting philosophy where it's like if they can take their data and you think about this project, it's a data project. It's manipulation and it's getting in order and it's, we get the documents out, move it, rinse and repeat. But when they can't, this becomes a more, in my opinion, a more thorough process, and a more exciting process because we get to rebuild their firm to an extent and how they position themselves to their client. That's the most important work pre-day one, because if you have confidence as an advisor whenever you're instilling this in the end client, the likelihood of them moving is much greater rather than you fumbling, tripping over your own words, not understanding the frequently asked questions. Those are stuff that then makes this process that much more complicated as opposed to smoother.
Got it. And of course, besides the advisor, there's also like a team, right? An operations team, an admin team that's involved typically, obviously, when you guys work with transitioning firms as well. How many people end up working on a largish transition project? And, what does the day-to-day look like for, the operators on the job?
Yeah, so if we've moved a couple of multi-billion dollar firms, I'll just kind of always relate to that one in this process, but we typically do employ an extra 2 to 4 people on our staff for the duration of this project, plus their operations staff. So we start every single day with them holding a huddle to focus on priorities. Think about what happens here. ABC, John Smith is coming in today. Susie just gave us a call and said that she would like her packets ready today for this transfer, and she's going to come in and sign in person. So there's a designation of roles that then take place during that initial huddle, and the urgency and the items that are the main points that we have to kind of resolve together as a firm on that given day, right? There's obviously the operations staff. Our whole goal with them, Vineet, is they're calling clients, they're collecting data, and then we want them on the phones all day long and understand the custodial platform as kind of step 2 of that. Our job is to understand the custodial platform, prep the paperwork, go client to client, ensure that everything is in good order, and then do the filing process from there. So it is truly a breakout of roles and priorities at this point. But the biggest thing that happens to this is every day is different. Every day changes priorities. Some days are blitzes for people coming in. Some day there's no one coming in. We just can actually catch up on things like that. Not to mention the weekends. I will say that some firms, obviously, we have to do this. We got to get things done. And then, that kind of changes the flow as well on this, and depending on what operators can work on weekends. And then our staff does the same thing as well, too. So it's an all-in-all project, Vineet. Like the advisors start it goes straight to the admins and ends with us, and then goes back to the admins for a follow-up call to set up the initial financial review for them. It's interesting how it kind of works out.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it's like an all hands on board, weekdays, weekends, everything. It reminds me of my time at HSBC trying to get massive
12
projects
hours a
over the
day, 12 hours a
Yeah,
day, not taking care of yourself sometimes. I always
insane.
say focus and prioritize yourself though during this period. If you don't always take care of yourself, your work eventually starts to lack, and then, it just becomes that standard ricochet effect down from there.
Right. Actually, that brings up a good point, right? Because I was just trying to think, what does it feel like for an advisor that's on the move, right? Like it can't be easy, right? Because you feel like you want to be in control, but often you're not in control of everything. What does the advisor go through during this period, in your
It,
experience?
yeah, honestly, Vineet, it's probably the most stressful time of their lives. Think about it. We work all day long. We know our business. We're entrepreneurs. We know how invested our heart is into our business that we do. And, we think about this stuff 24/7, right? Multiply that by 100 for the first 30 days. Whenever your salary and your income is at risk, as well as your livelihood and your reputation. So it's kind of like this massive undertaking that comes in. And on top of that, you have that, top end pyramid, but then you're also learning. You're learning a new firm, new operations, new platforms, new processes. Wow, again, there's an income. And it's like this and if you think about the firms, the advisors that move, some of these guys, Vineet, have been at XYZ firm for 20 plus years. That's what they know. That's their bread and butter. That's their passion. Yeah. So when you couple that with the endless hours, just what me and you were talking about. So from the advisor perspective, they're working weekends. They're doing blitzes with clients that can't get a hold on during the weekdays on weekends to ensure that we could get some of the assets moved. Or we got to meet with Susie, who couldn't come in because she has a 9 to 5 job and now she's only available on the weekends. So like that type of things happen. And, that's why I really say having the right partner, owning the process is just as important as actually doing the work related to it. And honestly, Vineet, I think I'm more of a therapist and a life coach than a consultant at these times, because it constantly we're here to be their sounding board, ricochet what matters to them, their concerns, and get it in line. It's, like I said, from their perspective, the most stressful period of their life. Our whole goal is to take that off of their shoulders and really try to make it a streamline. I could tell you this from days past. Sometimes I'm on the phone with the advisors until midnight their time and things like that. I'm not saying that's the healthiest thing to do, but that's the type of responsibility that we want to take off of their shoulders to own, in order to make this process and this perspective a little bit easier for them.
Right. No, I can imagine. And, in your experience, what's that biggest fear for them? What does that mean? Worry? What keeps them up at night?
Will my clients come with me? That's probably the biggest question mark. There's a big confidence factor that has to come in, and especially whenever you're a non-protocol advisor, don't own any of the data, any of the clients. You got to really have a lot of faith in you, yourself, your team, and the clients that they're going to end up coming with you. I always say, like, the clients that are prepared and ready to position, like the advisors that are ready to position this move as a strength rather than a reactive scenario on their phone calls, have much greater success than the guys that are actually just listening to the questions, concerns they have. It's a better scenario where if the advisor can again become a hunter and a gatherer and really proactively and explaining to them that this is the right move for you and for us, that ultimately increases the likelihood of the clients coming to you at a faster stance than them waiting periods or them not coming to you at all. So I think that's the biggest worry. It's just their clients. I mean, that's the name of the business, right? If I don't own my clients and they don't come, what about,
why are you doing this, right? And many of these relationships, it's taken you time to build it to where they are, and last thing you want is lose them. But I really like what you said there about not being on the defensive and being confident, and making it sound like the most natural
positioning's everything in this, right? And if you think about just being an entrepreneur, which is kind of cool because we always get to relate to these guys and this individual, we live their jobs each and every day. You have to be confident in your product. You have to believe in yourself. You have to believe that what you are building is a solve for XYZ persona or institution, whatever it may be. It's the same thing on their side. You got to believe. And the advisors that don't really have that trust and faith in themselves are the guys that struggle during this process a little bit more. The guys that do have this, I've seen this process get done, in that 30, 45-day period very smoothly with very little hiccups, and everything kind of works out.
Right, right. And then when it does take, the 3 months or 6 months or whatever, right? Depending, of course, it depends on the size of the book. But what is the, step in the process that burns most time typically?
I would actually say it's the execution of the process that's been created. Since, again, I'm going back to our problems here, since there isn't a central platform that acts as the source of truth or the integration hub to the other various platforms that an advisor may be utilizing, like, a CRM, performance reporting, or whatever it may be, that's kind of like the biggest thing that happens, because there's a lot of duplication of data that gets taken in. Advisor says, hey, Vineet, you're ready to go. I'm going to send you over to Nico. Nico's going to collect the majority of your information to assume this process. I'm collecting the information. I'm on a phone call with you. It could take 20, 30, an hour, sometimes 2 hours. Sometimes people don't know where their information is. So there's that type of process that gets a little bit more of a hiccup there. But then from there, there's data duplication. I'm not only inputting this once, I now got to add all the data into Wealthbox. I now got to add the household into Orion at this point, or something along those lines. So there's those types of issues that continuously amount to time. And if you think about just holding the call, that's just the beginning of the process. The rest of the process is what really takes up a lot of their time.
Mm-hmm.
If you're moving client to client to client because of calls and speed, that part of the process starts to really lack. And then there's even more of a catch up or things that fall through the cracks. So that's kind of why I think like the most important thing is right now, there's just not that central view besides Excel sheets to understand where everybody's at in the process, right? I think whenever that thing gets created, this whole thing can get smoothed out a lot more. And then the safety and that feeling of, hey, where is Vineet in the process is truly owned, rather than them having to guess and make more micro decisions for already something that does get a little bit more and more complex.
Yeah, no, so true. And, I think obviously technology helps with that. And I think the point you made there, client by client, so sequential, right? I think the technology also allows parallel processing, which will again shrink the timelines. But, I was just thinking like, the transitions can drag on for a variety of reasons. And, what does that do to the advisor? Like, as, like maybe they started with a 2-month timeline. Now we're past 2 months.
It happens too, right? And I would say when the process extends or they don't believe in the process, it's when things start to break. There's going to be hiccups, right? And advisors are really great gatherers, and during this period, they got to own that relationship at the same time. So you got kind of these both. You got this little perfect storm where clients aren't in a rush, or their admins are a little bit behind. So then the process starts to break down. And I really can say, like, if that starts to break, the first thing that starts to happen is they start to disbelieve in themselves. And then all of that prep work that we did for the 2-3 months before the transition even began kind of gets lost in translation during this period. And that disturbance doesn't only start at the advisor. The client's going to feel that. Their operations staff are going to feel that. And the consultants working on their business are also going to feel that stress too. So you got to continuously understand that every little thing is going to come with its own challenges. I wish me and you could just give you a book as an entrepreneur and say, hey, follow this playbook for the first 100 days and we're going to be multimillionaires and very successful, right? It doesn't really just work that way. I wish it did. It would make life a little bit easier, right? But then, things happen. So I think it's just they got to take the time to understand the process works. We're building this to actually be repeatable for my business. And if these times of stress and really hard situations start to amount themselves, you got to take time to prioritize yourself and your family. It's the only thing that can get you outside of that little weird cloudy space in work is to continue to focus on your health and the outside experiences. I always really try to tell my advisors during this, don't work 7 days a week. It's not the most, and you will hit a burnout point at some point, and then your sleep's going to start to enact. So that confidence, it always just begins by owning the process. And honestly, Vineet, if that stuff breaks, everyone feels it. And the likelihood of people moving whenever there's stress in a firm, and the attrition that comes when there's stress into the firm, isn't worth the time, right? So that's the
Right.
mentality
One
I
thing
think people
leads,
just got to have it. One thing leads to
yeah, I mean,
another.
totally. One thing leads to another, and I can imagine for the ops team as well, right? It's not like fun work, right? It's manual
Yeah.
work. It's repetitive data gathering, right? What are their emotions like during this period? I mean, you mentioned burnout there a couple of times. I can imagine that happens a lot too.
Pure exhaustion. I mean, if there's one thing that has to happen, I talk about us being a therapist on top of my job too. The operations people are even more of that because they know the advisors. They've worked with them for a period of time at their old job and how they best behave and work together too. So it's a constant work in that process there. But the sympathy of operators and what needs to be built between the advisor, just think about owning that process. That alone's exhausted, right? Then you couple in the manual work, having to talk to clients, having to input data in multiple various places. It just continues to stack and stack up. And then you as the operator, I want to try to get off this phone call in the next 20, 30 minutes and then move on to the next one so that we can stay ahead. It doesn't ever really work that way, right? Some things take longer than others, and there's not a very consistent way to intake information or to help the client scan documents to get that back to you too. So you couple all of that together, being a life coach, and the fact that, again, whenever I was talking about it previously in the call, that they're learning new processes, new systems, new operations staff, it is exhaustion. The attrition risk for people who are doing this move alone is almost in the 50% over the first 18 months. The firms that actually own this responsibility and really continue to hold that family, because you're starting a corporation, you're starting a family realistically with these guys, that removes the burnout and the attrition risk drastically decreases from that. You've got to remember they're humans. And I do think at times that does get lost in translation.
Yeah, I think that's probably not talked about enough because obviously the focus is on moving the assets, getting the clients over the line, etc. And also at the end of the line, the other side of the equation is the end client, right? And I'm sure it's visible to them as well that it's why is it slow, why is it a bit disorganized? What are those telltale signs that kind of gives you the sense that hey, maybe this client is now having second thoughts?
It's yeah, it's funny because me and you were talking about that, and the atypical world is a silent treatment, right? People kind of just go in the winds or don't really talk to you, or hey, it's like where is Johnny? I haven't heard from him. That doesn't really happen during this. You'd be surprised. They actually speak up a lot. And I've heard a lot of calls or anything, like they'll let you know when they're displeased or they'll threaten to move their assets back to XYZ firm where they came from. It's like this cat and mouse game. And the more that you stay ahead of it, set the proper expectations and don't. And people have a problem with this, but don't overpromise and underdeliver during this period. Anything, you should underpromise and overdeliver during this period. It's a conception, it's a psychological positioning on this. And just because something might take 7 to 10 business days now doesn't mean in 4 or 5 months you could be down to that 3 to 5 business day. But it's really about getting in front of them and making sure that they have trust instilled in you, themselves, and your team that you're going to get this done. The minute that trust goes away, Vineet, or the minute that they're panicking, they pick up the phone. And honestly, that only just actually delays further time because now I have to go and take, as an operator, a call from John because he's really upset about this process. And I just have to explain we're just waiting for the transfer to hit all of this. That type of stuff only slows down processes for the rest of the clients and ultimately gets advisors, to my point, to my point previously, losing confidence, and that drag process starts to kind of get enacted. Be proactive. the best way to do this.
Yeah, it's a bit of a vicious loop. And I think from a client standpoint, I can totally understand, right? Because trust is the reason why you agreed to move in the first place with the advisor. And when that trust erodes, even if you move the client over the line, if it's an unhappy client, you're probably at risk of losing that client at
You
some
got
point
a lot of
in the
work
future.
then you have to do too. Like that average, 8 hours a quarter type client could become a 16-20 type
Mm.
client for that. So like things kind of happen. And Vineet, to your point, it's money. It's money. It's the biggest blessing or the biggest evil how certain people look at this, right? And anytime that money comes into this, stress naturally gets heightened from the end client. And anytime there's disruption and you add that with the concept of money, there's the natural formula of heightened senses that kind of get enacted here, right? So I always go back to my Dr. Joshua Wilson side here and how I was taught as a financial advisor. You need to teach them how to behave during this period. If you don't, you'll always be stressed. You'll always be behind the eight ball. But if you instill that confidence, give them a repeatable process, and show them how this will end up working, that alone obviously helps.
Right, right. Which makes me think that, obviously people talk about client attrition, revenue delays, but there's a lot more to this whole process, right, in terms of the hidden costs. Is there a number that you'd put to it, that the true cost transition? I don't know. I'm trying to think about myself.
I've always struggled with this because it's like, hey, you could always put a formula for clients and the revenue number, but it's not just revenue. It's not just dollars. It's their livelihoods. It's your employees' livelihood. And like I said previously, it's to people their most important livelihood, which is their money, their net worth that they worked on for the last 30, 40 plus years. So when you couple that, you couple the stress your team is going through, you couple the stress your clients are going through, and you couple the stress that you yourself as the financial advisor are going through, and you don't make money unless that entire circle works and the clients come with you and move their assets with you, it's an unfathomable number. It really is. And like, again, it always goes back to the cost of acquisition is more expensive if you don't own that process, as opposed to you minimizing that instance. It is a much cheaper stance here. So I don't have a number. I always just say it's unfathomable, but there is ways to keep that number a little bit lower than on the higher end, realistically, right?
Right, right. No, makes total sense. I think unfathomable is probably a good way to describe it, Nico. Okay, let's maybe get to some of the war stories and make this a little real. Right?
Oh, the best time, right?
Is there one transition that you'd call was the toughest?
It's hard for me to always say like what the toughest is because again, there's different intricacies and nuances with each of them. But what always just comes to my brain just over the last like a year and a half, I helped move a team from Stifel to New Edge. We weren't allowed to bring any data, and we used Goldman Sachs as a custodian. The problem that ended up happening here was Stifel didn't play nice with Goldman Sachs into this, and were rejecting ACAT transfers due to proprietary funds or option strategies that were near expiration on here too. Or if there was XYZ fund that wasn't approved at Goldman from here. So it's kind of like all of these items that normally speaking, whenever you do a transition, they move everything over that they can move over, and then the laggard positions, I can't hold a muni bond portfolio or whatever it may be, usually stay at the end account at their previous custodian, then you have to reinitiate a transfer again. That didn't happen. It actually happened wherever they held the entire account up until that position was liquidated. Usually that's not the way that things happen in this space, but that can happen depending on certain needs or the custodian's, client risk that's affiliated to a transfer of assets. That's sort of the way that they got themselves out of it. So then if you think about that, advisors had to call their clients, hop on the phone with Stifel, get on their 1-800 number, sell the positions, Then we had to reinitiate the ACAT again, and we didn't really have a consistent way of seeing why things weren't getting rejected. They didn't give us much information on that, so we were just kind of a little bit behind the eight ball when watching that, and there was a lot of manual checks and bounces with that. That just extended naturally kind of this whole process. That something is that people always think, hey, once they sign the dotted line, the transfer of assets get over. That didn't happen this one, right? So then there was kind of a little bit of a, okay, let's reset the process. Let's reset the expectations for the client. Let's let them know there may be additional calls to liquidate ABC from the previous custodian, and then that should smooth it over rather than us being reactive to that. Because those scenarios of where is my money occurred during this process. And it was just due to a little bit of a lack in Stifel wanting to play game with the end custodian, and then also creating a little bit of issues with having to sell those products. Very interesting to happen there.
Right. Never nice to hear, where is my money? I think that's
a tough one to And that's the call, Vineet, right? Like, these guys are very proactive with that. Like, I can tell you one thing, whenever I was an advisor, especially the older clients that I worked with, they're checking this stuff every day, right? And then if they don't see this stuff, that fear, there's been a lot of bad bears in this, bad actors in this space for a period of time. That fear starts to get enacted, and it becomes a violent ricochet effect. I guess the end custodian, the previous custodian, did their job of trying to maintain their assets and make it a little bit more difficult for us to an extent. But at the end of the day, we did make a plan together, and they were able to accomplish over 90% of their assets in the first 60 days. Slowed it down a little bit.
Got it. And for good reason. If you had to put up put on a warning label of the unavoidable mistakes for advisors, is there anything that you'd have?
Not taking care of themselves and prioritizing a little bit of help during this period. It's like anything, right? You just talked about this with your HSBC days. You work 12 plus hours a day, and a lot of these guys were a little bit younger whenever we were working those longer shifts, but now we have families, and a lot of them have to come home to families, talk to their children, talk with their other things. You need to dedicate that time towards those individuals and to yourself. Because if you don't, you're going to start to struggle sleeping. You're not going to go to the gym. You're not going to eat as healthy as you should be. I'm going to go and get my McDonald's thing rather than actually the salad that I should be eating here. And it just continues to start to lead into that vicious cycle, which again makes you feel the drag related to it because you're not actually taking care of yourself. And whenever you don't take care of yourself for a month, Vineet, you feel slow, right?
Yep.
And then that drag starts to kind of get in your brain and like, oh my gosh, how much longer? I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. You shouldn't have those thought processes if you can still take the time to focus on everything else besides work. That's my warning label. Don't stop life. Continue to actually use that as the tool to success to break up things rather than to make you a guinea pig for the ABC amount of days realistically.
Understood. No, I think that's great advice. And I think the other question I had was for someone who's kind of setting out or starting out on a transition or evaluating something, is there any advice that you'd give them up front before they get started with this?
I would always say, and there are certain instances, like you can't do pre-seed selling and other things like that to your clients. That's illegal if you're not allowed to take data and things like that. But it's about believing in yourself. The way that you're doing it today can be done at a new firm. And then it's also about making sure that these guys really understand the upside related to owning their own business. Because yes, like I said, a lot of them are entrepreneurs. But I do think a lot of these guys, if they can really get used to, again, prioritizing themselves, owning the process, creating a repeatable stance, partnering with the right people, you can remove those warning labels. And it can be a project rather than a massive firm undertaking. And that's the mentality I think you really want to instill on, as me as a consultant, to the advisors and to their operators, that there will be light at the end of the tunnel. And if you continue to do that, I think it's, makes it into a really good spot as a team.
Got it. I know definitely the voice of experience And a lot of food for thought for folks who might be setting out.
Try
this
to do
journey.
my job, right? It's kind of like what I said. It's, we're life coaches, I would say, during this period too. We're here to talk them off at different scenarios and really just become a true colleague to them during this time. A lot of the guys that I worked, that I did transitions with, I still have relationships with at this
Yeah, I was just
time.
going to ask that. Probably build very lasting relationships, right?
You
Yeah.
do. And like, yes, and always say like, hey, why does this have an inefficiency, or what's the hold up for a practice? Like, like what happens onto this? I don't think as a firm we've ever really had a true like life or death dire scenario where the firm's risk was that scenario. And it's constantly like really enacting that to these individuals that gets them to say, okay, these guys aren't really just looking at me as a project. They want to know who I am. And, everything that I do and everything that you do, we want real world experience. Makes better product on our side too, right? So it's always about just, I really think we do a really good job on this. Don't look at us as just a consultant. Look at us as an actual business partner during this. And the business partner can continue to extend beyond the transition, can stop. That's kind of the way that we really want to be treated as individuals here.
No, makes total sense. No, that was fascinating, Nico. I think a lot of interesting anecdotes and great points that you kind of brought in there.
It takes a village to do this whenever you kind of think about this, right? It's like anything. If you half-ass it, or my language on here, put the pressure on your team or don't have the proper expectations, it's going to be you versus the world. But if you can really take into account everything that I just previously talked about and making sure people are humans during this process, work with experts. You'll have a much smoother process than you were previously doing this on your own. It's not fun. This isn't fun. It can be if you do it the right way, and then you're always going to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But if you do it yourself, it's a tough undertaking. Can't stress that enough. Yep. So, Vineet, I got a couple of questions for you since we put some time on me this entire stance. But, I always just want to say this, and I can't thank you enough for wanting to take this on, but what drew you to this problem? A lot of firms over the last decade have really avoided trying to build the transition tool because of the what ifs, the nuances that we were previously talking about. Why this problem? What drew you to this?
Right. So I'm on the hot seat now, Nico. It's interesting. I mean, I was at Future Proof in Miami last year, and I was talking to Paul Wolf, who's a good friend he was a good friend now, and he's a senior leader, sales leader at Red Black, and he was generally telling me about his experience transitioning the books from his own previous firm, and how painful that whole process was. And then, from there on, I've been talking to many other advisors who've been through that journey themselves, RIAs, even large platforms like some of the mega RIAs, and everyone says the same thing. It's not a fun process. It's very complicated. You just throw people at the problem, and it's like death by spreadsheets, calls back and forth, et cetera, right? And that, the course of those conversations, I realized the gravity of the problem, right? It's not just that it's complicated, but why it's complicated. And it's funny, Nico. I've noticed that everyone talks about transitions actually in the industry, right? There's several reasons for transitions. There's breakaways. There's obviously the M&A activity, and in general, in aging demographics of the advisors means that many of them are open to being acquired, which means that they are always looking for a deal. But the industry generally is talking about the strategic side of it, right? The deal, what's the best deal, how you should go about finding the right next step or the right buyer, etc. But not many people, or hardly anyone, talks about the operational side of it. I mean, imagine you've done this big deal, and then you come across this, massive process, which is not easy at all. So that really drew me to the problem. And, I felt like with technology, it is solvable today. I mean, large chunks of it, especially with AI. To a large extent, maybe it wasn't earlier, but now you can make a meaningful difference. And yeah, that kind of got us started on this. And, I think maybe like you said, tough, impossible problems have a way of finding me as well, I guess.
They do. And, it's kind of like, it's everything that you're saying. And, it's an echo of everything that I was saying, that this process doesn't seem to have gone better. And it's to your point, right? The older demographics, the individuals that ultimately sign their name on the dotted line, but don't really think about the process behind the scenes until they're actually in it and really getting into it. If you go to, I will always say this, if you go to an OSJ that leads with money as their main instance, that kind of like, hey, come to us, be on the alert for a problem during the transition piece, because they usually treat money as a way to level set and to actually weather the period that it takes to recoup the revenue from this. So if a firm may not lead with money, the chances are their process might be a little bit smoother than other firms. But again, that's up to your stance to be able to do the due diligence, and that they have the either operators or third-person specialists like myself to be able to do this process on your behalf, or as a true extension on your behalf at this point. But what did you see through those conversations? Like, what was missing realistically here, Vineet? Like, everyone hates this. So what do you think is actually missing here?
So I think the more I looked at the problem and the way we've built this and the approach we've taken is that, I want to solve the whole puzzle. I don't want to solve pieces of the puzzle, right? I think you made this point earlier that, ultimately it's about data, getting the data in, and then doing documentation, right? Now, I think different people so far have they've broken down this problem into those two parts and said on the data gathering form, hey, how can I have better looking forms or more dynamic forms? But it's still forms, right?
Right.
Intake forms, right? And on the other hand, can I map data better and get some documents completed quicker? Incremental, ways to look at it. And also, again, solving a part of the problem. But, Prad, myself, when we looked at this, we were like, there is a lot of stress in the system, right? The anxiety, the lack of control, the lack of visibility across all stakeholders. There's the advisors, the operators, obviously the end clients, and a transition consultant as well, right? How can we make a platform that kind of talks to every one of them, gives them, visibility, not just where each household is in the journey, but where the whole project is, right? Because I think there's a very important point here that it's not just that you want to know what issues you need to focus on, what's delaying the overall transition, but because it's such a long and arduous journey, you also want to see the wins. 2 weeks in, if you know that, hey, I'm tracking quite well, like 25% of my transition is done, that's something that is going to give you a lot of energy as well, right?
Definitely.
So I think, that's been our approach of, built a best-in-class data gathering flow. We've made sure that no matter which end firm and custodian you go to, the product automatically readjusts itself to fit those needs. The documentation is automated, but there's the whole other piece in terms of how the technology holds the project together, keeps you on track, gives you full visibility, goes to your client only if needed. I think that's the approach where, that's the piece I think where we focused a lot on, rather than just looking at it, I need to fix this piece, I need to fix that piece, etc.
A lot of people really did just look at solving them in the one-by-one problems. Mapping. It's an intake. Is it the dashboard type of experience? I think that's why I'm so excited for this to actually work, because you wanted to take my brain and understand my process from A to Z and actually digitize it. And so did I too, right? I was tired of the lack of insights that were available throughout Excels. I was tired of advisors coming to me and say, where's Susie? Where's John in this process? Like, there's a better way to bring that to light. And I think that's what, to your point, that's what everyone was kind of missing on here, is the actual data and the insights related to it. What's really exciting for me on this, Vineet, is kind of just seeing where this is going to go afterwards, right? So.
Yep, big time, right? I mean, I think the early results are very promising, right? Obviously, I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that, since you guys have been using Fast Tracker now. But I think what we're seeing is great. I mean, for us, it's three things really, right? I think one, to your point earlier, the operations teams shouldn't see themselves as just, doing grunt work day in, day out. They need to be supervising the project. They need to be spending time with the clients. The clients should have full visibility of where their assets are, how long it's going to take, and they should only be asked for information if needed, right? Or for whatever little is needed. And for the advisor, just knowing where the transition is at, where each project is at, sorry, each household is at, who needs attention, would make sure that the transition happens faster, fewer clients end up leaving, and they may end up making more money as well, right? So I think those are the three, boxes that we want to tick, and we are starting to tick as well with work that we're seeing so far.
Yeah, and to your point, kind of like what have I seen from a success with
Yes,
this tool?
yeah.
And it's kind of like we've gotten these different iterations of the platform now, but just from a true form mapping and a insight ability to actually understand where people are at in the process, the difference. Normally speaking, whenever you get a full intake form, you're getting trust accounts, you got client information, you got LLCs that own certain trust here at this point, you got contributions, you got withdrawals, you got transfer of assets. Big micro decision that takes place on our decision tree at this point to then know exactly what forms are needed, and then we got to do the work, right? Got to come in, you actually got to map it. And then there is room for error whenever you're copying and pasting the information. Just make sure it doesn't populate it. Or if there's slashes for dates, those dates don't get ported over automatically because the form library inside of Fidelity doesn't accept slashes for dates and months at this point. So there's like those little types of things that you have to make sure your Excel's kind of lined up. And then you have the issues whenever you're copying on that. And then plus, then you got to send it out and actually own the entire process there. The biggest thing, you gave me a piece that can map forms for me right now. So if you think about just speed of use to populate stamps, you set me up about 90% realistically on that side. Then you gave me a platform that now actually can have clients send information or act as a client intake so that the admins or the advisors can send an intake out to them. You now remove an operator having to be on the phone for another hour to collect that information for someone who's tech savvy. Doesn't mean that they're not going to do that for someone that's older, but when you conceptualize the hours you saved me, and now the hours that you're saving the admins, and now the hours that you're saving the advisors to understand where people are at in the process and becoming more proactive rather than reactive on that, you're presenting everything that I really was stating previously of how you run a successful transition. And by having this tool and being able to utilize that tool as the source of truth during this period, you're giving everybody access to information that previously isn't available unless they actually are utilizing the Custodians tools from A to Z at this point. So it's pretty exciting to actually kind of see not how much you spend my time up, obviously, but two, the success that the transitions actually have had are actually much faster and greater and less NIGOs than us previously doing it ourselves. So been excited about that piece.
No, I'm so happy to hear that, Nico. It's music to my ears, right? And I think it's time to now take the industry by storm in some ways as well. There's a lot more we can do here.
And Vineet, I always kind of say here, like, you asked previously, like, where do you see this going? I don't think it only stops at transitions. I do think you will become the source of truth for data to be ported over to other technology tools inside their ecosystem. Because if you think about a firm like New Edge, and we start to build the connective tissue to the CRMs into their performance reporting software, now the advisor could say, click here to integrate with WealthBox, click here to integrate with Orion, rather than them actually having to do it themselves. Then you're multiplying even more hours into this. I did a little bit of a study. I think the average client acquisition for a transition is roughly 6 to 8 hours, depending on the complexity. Sometimes it can go a little bit higher if there's more on that. But if you're removing the data duplication and you're removing the intake, you can get that number down to 3 to 5. And I think that's the goal that we were realistically trying to achieve as a firm here on your side, is continuing to minimize that number, save hours, and make a central platform as the source of truth for everything else going forward. But what do you think? I mean, that's just my dreams on here. But what's your goals at this point too? Like, where do you see this actually going next after this?
No, I think, listen, all that you just said there, right? Like, obviously we want to, conquer transitions, make sure it works hit those 3 or 4 boxes that I said earlier, right? Make sure that it does what it needs to do. Make sure every stakeholder involved has a great experience. But then we can then start going beyond that. I mean, you talked about how one aspect of transition is transitioning the books, but then also transitioning the data is something
Yep.
that we can look at. There's another piece around the data itself that you're transitioning. The data are people looking at that data today? Are they assessing the data? Are they using that for how they provide advice to their clients in the future? Are they using that to benchmark the rest of their book? I think these are certain areas as well that could become very, very interesting as we dig deeper into this.
Put some
As well, I think.
Put some quants to some data, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Everything is possible these days, right? With the compute and technology where it is today. But I think this can go several ways. I mean, and that's the beauty of picking a hard problem, right?
You picked a hard one to solve, but hey, if we solve it, I do think there's something that can really change the way that business is being done in this space previously. So thank you. I really appreciate the hard work and effort that you guys have done into this. I'm beyond excited to see where this actually ends up going.
No, for sure. And I think, listen, it's been a dream working with you, everyone. And, we've only just started. Right? And I'm excited for Miami as well in a few days, future proof, right? We're going to
see you in
get
person
there.
finally in a couple of weeks. And again, just a nice little reminder, we are going to have a nice happy hour here on the AdvizorStack side. So got a bunch of different colleagues, vendors, RIAs, custodians that are joining our party. So if other RIAs are interested or at
Yeah, sounds good. No, this has been great, Nico. Thank you so much.
Thanks, buddy.
And I'll see you soon on the beach.
See you on the beach, man. Have a great rest of your night. Talk to you soon.
You too. Take care.